It's Gary from Chime again, and I just wanted to introduce, if I could, the gentleman who's going to be speaking to you today. We're super stoked to have him. His name is Steven Wener, and he's been doing the real estate thing since he was about 10 years old, helping out his dad, doing some door knocking, some paper delivery, and he's been riding that train ever since. And the reason I bring that up first and foremost is because he's seen it all. The things that you guys have probably experienced and the things that you may experience in the future. So it's just going to be some solid gold here. I recommend, if you don't already have a pen and paper on hand, grab one. There's going to be some great information. We're going to share the slide deck with you. And the name of this webinar is Managing the Meltdown, How to Hold Your Client's Hand Through the Strong Emotions of a Home Transaction. And I think that says it all. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Steven Wener, guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction, and it makes me laugh about just the way this business is set up and the things that we don't really know. The last thing you ever think about is managing somebody's meltdown. You know, I wish that they would teach you that in real estate school. And the unfortunate part about what they teach you in real estate school is how not to get sued instead of how do you actually work with people, get something under contract, and then make sure that it stays under contract and it doesn't fall apart for the wrong reasons. So a little bit of history on me. As Gary was mentioning, I've literally been, whether it was door knocking or involved with meeting strangers, right? Like in the service business, we're basically dealing with strangers. And I started that when I was about 10 years old. One of my best friend's dad used to work for a newspaper company, and I'd go do two things. I'd go work for Frank and knock doors in apartment buildings and sell newspapers. And to hang out with my dad, I'd also go knock doors for his renovation company. And as I grew up, I really didn't want to be in construction per se. So my dad asked me if I wanted to take over his company. I politely declined. He said, "How about real estate?" And I said, He goes, "I'll pay for your course." And that's literally how I got into real estate. So I had already been working with people since the age of 10, but I started formally in real estate at 23. And construction or selling newspapers, you're not really dealing with too many meltdowns. So I was in for a treat when it came to understanding and experiencing everything that our clients go through. I'd made hundreds of thousands of phone calls. I've helped thousands of families buy or sell. Last year was my best year ever. It was around 40 million in real estate closed. And most of my business now comes from referrals. So the reason that I'm telling you those things is because I am in this business. I am constantly dealing with people. And the reason that I say that is because I get to see so much. And the more involved and invested you are in anything, the more you can start to get little peeks of what really happens in your industry that most people may not be prepared for. And in my opinion, when we were kind of brainstorming the idea of what do we want to talk about, I've never seen anybody talk about how do you manage an escrow, or depending on what part of the country you're in, if you're dealing with attorneys, how do you just work with your clients to keep everything on track? And the things that we're going to talk about, just so you understand some of the foreshadowing, we're going to talk about what the process looks like, the things that are involved, the psychology behind how we're working with people, how we have to also front load or give our clients information up front so that there aren't surprises. Because as you can see from this slide alone, moving to a new home is one of the more stressful events that ever takes place in life. And for those of you that are on this call, if you've actually bought or sold your own real estate, not every realtor actually owns a property. So if you have, relive that experience for yourself and remember everything that kind of took place, because I guarantee you the entire process, it couldn't have been just smooth or streamlined. There are always hiccups, even for yourself. And imagine, what did you go through if you want to relive those experiences for yourself? So like when you look at this slide, death of a loved one, divorce, loss of a job, getting married, moving to a new home, I mean, that actually fits into events that take place in life that can derail you, cause massive fighting, make you not even relate to your spouse properly, make you upset, you're getting information from different sources that may not even be credible. Like for those of you that are showing homes when they bring a distant family member and that person has the loudest voice, and you're like, why are you talking right now? You're saying the wrong things. I don't know if you've ever gone through any of those experiences, Gary, but I mean, like when people are like, hey, I'm going to bring my uncle, I'm like, oh my gosh.
The worst. Yeah.
Because you don't know what they're going to say because they're not invested, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like I'm posturing in that moment, just waiting for them to lob some grenade my way, right? and this is what I try to preface in the beginning of this is like, are you connected to what your client is about to experience? Because you can't assume that they're going through the process without anything internal or what is coming to them from the external. And what does it mean to them when they're buying this house? Is it their first house? Are they super excited about the process? Have they already moved 8 times because they're military and this is just one more thing and most of their house is already in boxes and it'll stay in boxes because they move so often? Connect yourself to what your client's experience is about to look like, because once you have that mental appreciation for what they're going to go through, you can be way more empathetic, you can sympathize, and you can start to actually relate to the experience so much better.
Steve, just real quick, you were talking about, bringing that uncle or something, and then do you know what they're about to experience. It makes me think of the occasions I've had where almost everybody that I'm talking to has a pseudo expert that's talking to them outside of your conversation, and telling them, here's what you need to look for. Here's what they're going to say, but they really mean. So maybe it's the uncle that's the one that's the pseudo expert, or maybe it's somebody outside of that. But how do you deal with that?
So I always ask when the relative, let's just use the uncle, right? If the uncle's been there and you can already tell that the uncle has this look in their eye that they're there to protect their nephew or their niece. I'm like, oh gosh. So I just try to break the ice, right? Hey, let's just say his name is John. Hey, John, how are you? You just start to make small talk so that you can at least create a relationship. In hostage negotiations, they try to let the hostage taker know the hostage's actual name so that there can be a relationship. Mm-hmm. That happens just because of a psychological connection that you want to occur. And when I talk about this stuff, I'm not talking about just, oh, this is so different. You're talking about a hostage versus being in the housing business. It's not that different when you can relate to people. All you have to do is become relatable and create some sort of a relationship with that person so they don't see me as the enemy, right? Oh, Steve just wants to make the sale. Because a lot of people will feel that way, right? Steve's in it for the commission, which is the last thing that I'm in it for. If I don't take care of the process, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
And I'll also ask them, hey, obviously you're here to take care of them. I just want to know, so I understand your level of just your personal real estate experience, but when's the last time you bought or sold a home, right? So I try to establish or at least create a framework of what their importance is in this role by having them speak out. Oh, I bought a house 8 years ago. Okay. So, and I can also tell them, well, that's fantastic that you bought a house 8 years ago. You went through the process. Is that still kind of fresh in your mind, or are there things that you're specifically looking out for them when we're looking out at property? So I can start to establish things, right? So all of this is taking into consideration that I want to build an idea of what the uncle's doing there so that my actual clients can hear for themselves what his experience is, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to, oh, he's an expert, John's an expert. It's like, not really an expert anymore. But John's just there to look after them, right? But I have to bring that to the forefront, because if not, John could be a walking grenade if I don't engage him. Mm-hmm. So I want to understand personality. I study physiology. For those of you that have ever taken personality tests, it gives you an idea of who you are, but more importantly, it gives you an idea of who they are if you repeatedly study personality tests and profiling to see how people show up, right? How do we comfort people? When I always tell my clients in the beginning of the process, my team is here for you. We're literally going to take care of you through the entire process. And I use those words, right? I'm going to take care of you. Professional conduct, you have to know your profession, which means I hope you've even read your real estate contract. You have to know how to talk to people professionally in this to give them ideas and solutions. And then front loading, and we're going to get to a slide. So I really work on the upfront expectations of what we're going to do to manage not just the transaction, but how they're never going to be left just hanging. We're going to be there for them.
Partnership piece, yeah.
Right, because that's what it is. Not people don't want to be told what to do. People want to feel like we're going through the process together.
Right.
And then what's most important to them, right? I always want to know what's important to the client, because if I'm just doing it my way, I can totally skip, bypass, miss, glaze over the things that are really important or relevant to them. So we're trying to take care of a lot of the work up front, right? And as we're going through this, as you're reading through this slide and as we move through it together, right, what would help them feel better about a present situation? I want them to know that we're on their side, because it is a team. And so many of us in this business don't let our clients know that we're going to be walking through this hand in hand. We just take the lead and we expect them to know. You can never have expectations in a service-based business. It's impossible. If I went to a restaurant and ordered a steak and they made it well done for me because they didn't ask how I like it, which is rare, they would have given me the steak, but it wasn't prepared to my liking. You always have to know what your client is expecting. And when you explain that, you'll let the other side know we're taking hard lines on certain positions, which we'll get into, right? Which will be in whether it's renegotiating something that came up. They don't like where the pricing is at. If you're in the pre-negotiation of everything before you've got your escrow solidified, and you start to get these emotions that come out in your clients. And the last thing we want to do is go from logic to emotion. Emotion is great when we're making offers, but if people start to posture that we're working with and they go into this logic-based thinking, there's nothing about logic that gets people excited. So we always have to tell people that we're going to build a plan around their wants and their expectations. And what do our clients actually want to accomplish? And are we going to continue with the transaction if we're not getting there, right? So you also, when we say that we're on our client side, if pricing is out of line, if the expectations from a seller as to what they think they're going to give our buyers are out of line, we also have to let our clients know that we're willing to walk away with them and let the other side know that, so that you're vocalizing the expectation for them, that you're truly on their side.
Yeah.
And open communication has to be there all the time, so your clients aren't afraid to tell you things, and you don't act as a mind reader, because that always gets it wrong. And you have to let your clients vent. Sometimes even in just personal relationships, when we're going through anything with a spouse, with a boyfriend, girlfriend, with our friends, sometimes people just want to get things off their chest, and it's not the end of the world. They just have to vocalize, and you just have to be quiet and allow them to do that. Because so often people will just want to get things off their chest, and that's it. They're like, oh, I feel better now. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, Gary, but I get that all the time. People just want to say what needs to be said.
Yes, absolutely. Been there.
So, been there, right? And I mean, you guys, as far as Chime, you're a CRM service that's so robust, but sometimes your client base will reach out to you and they'll be like, why isn't this working? What happened with this? And you just have to let them vocalize, and then you can take a step back, understand where they're really coming from, and then show them the solution, or you get your tech team involved, or you're not sure, but you can sympathize with them. But not everybody wants a solution right away. They just want to be heard. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying you got to listen, because if you jump ahead and you try to give an answer to a question that they're not asking, then you're just putting gas on the fire, you know? So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the worst thing you can do. So one of the things that my assistant and I did to front load the process for our clients, or create an expectation of the experience.
Jeez.
So this is our buyer slide, right? And for those of you that are looking at the screen right now, there's a lot of stuff there. And not everything is hyper relevant, but they're all steps in what's about to happen. And when we look at this can be a little bit daunting. But if we were to expect that our clients understood every piece of what was about to happen, do you seriously think that somebody's going to remember all of this, even if they bought a house or sold a house 4 years ago?
I think a little bit daunting is an understatement. Having purchased many homes in my life,
Yep.
I could have told you that I knew that inspections was part of the process,
Yep.
but I had no idea the onion layers here, brother. No idea.
Right. Yeah. And each one of these things has something that can come with it, right? If we just look at the home inspection, well, how many of you have ever had a perfect home inspection? Even on a brand new home, when you're doing your final walkthrough with whoever that person is that's designated on behalf of the new home company to walk the home for you. And they're going to, put their yellow sticky notes on the areas that need additional attention. Even a brand new house is going to have something. So just imagine resale, right? I always let my clients know there's probably 30 to 60 things that are going to get called out on the home inspection. And we're really going to focus on the top 1 to 3 because that's all that might be on there that we really have to worry about. And we're going to discuss everything else because those are relevant. But again, as you can see, I'm creating an expectation. I'm not just leaving it to the last minute because the whole preface to managing the meltdown is the more you can mitigate by giving people an expectation of the experience in the beginning, the less you're going to have to deal with during the escrow process, because that transaction could totally just kill the feeling if everything starts to layer in and they're not understanding what the process looks like, and then one more thing comes in and one more thing comes in and one more thing comes in. And when you start to layer the negatives because they had no idea those were going to start to happen or come across or hit them, then where does their mindset go, right? They become deflated, their energy's gone, the excitement about the property is gone. And we want that emotional connection. We need that emotional connection because without it, we don't have anything drawing them through the process. We're just buying a house. Most people don't just buy houses.
I think that this not only makes it a clear path as to what they're going to expect going forward. Mm-hmm. But I think that it also really builds value in what you're providing to them. Where's the money going that they're giving to you? The piece that you get, what are you doing to earn that? And, you're building that relationship and everything, and you're helping them define that property. And there's the negotiation piece, like everybody expects that. But all the stuff on the back end, once you find that home that you love, like then what? And I really think that the return on their investment is just made clear by something like this.
Yeah, and that's it. Now they know, right? And then if they ever go to sell in the future, they have an understanding of what the experience is going to be like. Not so much on the selling side, I'll provide them with a flow chart like this, but what the next buyer is going to go through. And we can talk about those things, and they'll have more empathy, and they'll also understand the process and the flow. And that's the most important thing, right? And of that flow chart, there are really 4 standouts that are like landmines that you can just trip over in this process that will make people just lose it. And this is where we earn our salt, right? And the first area, for those of you, again, that have bought a house, pre-qualification. How many of you are talking to your clients and they're like, the bank wants one more piece of paper, and they're like dying inside. They're like, my credit's great, my income's fantastic. Why are they asking me for this? I've already sent it over, and I've already sent what they're asking for twice. And the unfortunate part is we have to have lending involved, and the underwriters, ever since we had the meltdown after 2008, as we started to come back from there and recover in 2010, 11, once we were recovering, the banks, they were petrified, and they had to create all of these safety nets. And in the beginning, they were overprotecting themselves, which was driving the buyers crazy, because it's almost like you couldn't provide enough documentation to get a loan. And tell me how frustrating that would be, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So when you consider that, you're going to have people also talking to multiple lenders, and they're worried about running their credit multiple times. We're talking about rapid credit rescore sometimes because we have to fix credit or we have to get some debt off, and what's that going to do? And we're rerunning credit, and their FICOs are getting affected. And people are very emotionally connected to their FICO scores. I don't know if you've come across that in your part of the real estate world, Gary, but in my part of the world, FICO for so many people, they're like, nobody runs my credit. And they are adamant. So I don't know if you come across that from time to time in your side of it, but have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, just personally, but unfortunately, I treated my FICO like a girlfriend who didn't deserve me. So
Okay,
that's all I'll say about that. I need to treat my FICO a little bit better going forward. So.
right. Well, that's good. That means you're working on your relationships.
That's
So,
right. Exactly.
right. But the other thing about FICO and knowing your craft, right? Now within a 30-day window, if you're repeatedly running credit, it's not going to affect your client as much. So it's
Correct.
the ability to mitigate the way they're feeling or their interpretation of things because people get worried. So I'm not the premise of this webinar is not just about managing the major meltdowns. It's being able to also reset expectations for people or what they're thinking. And knowing as much as we can about our craft allows us to have intelligent conversations with our clients that they had no idea about. Because if
Mm.
you talk to a lot of agents out there right now, guaranteed, most of them don't know about the small window where you can run credit under a specific umbrella that the credit companies will now pick up on, and they won't ding you every time if it's
Exactly.
within a certain window, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So you have to know so much about this craft because if not, you're going to be managing meltdowns everywhere. And that's the last thing you want because you, as the professional, are going to be pulling your hair out. And if you're doing that, then there's no way you can actually take over for your client when they're going through their own meltdown.
Hmm.
So the whole lending part is crazy. And it's not just the pre-qualification, it's actually when you're in it at times. Because if you have a poor lender who doesn't tell you not to go buy a car a week before you close, right? And then all of a sudden you've dinged your credit,
Hmm.
right? You've got a higher debt load. And now what do you do? And I've seen that so often and people panic. And that's what I mean, like creating these expectations for your clients or working with a lending professional that is a professional so that they can also lay down exactly how the process goes so that you don't find yourself walking in through a minefield at the end. And how do you fix this, right? You can't just give the car back. So what do? How do you offset that new debt? So there's
Hmm.
so many things to pay attention to, and there are certain things you can never come back from, right? If you mess up your DTI, your debt to income, because you went and bought a new car just before close, now what?
Yeah.
You're finished, right? So sometimes you can't even manage the meltdown. Sometimes you just have to give a reality and then find out what they can do and when they can get back in the game. You can't always win,
At that time,
right?
it's just
So as
setting proper expectations. This is already done. The milk's been spilt. Now here's how we.
exactly,
Yeah.
yep. And we just have to regroup, reset, and have a new timeline for when we can effectively get back in the game. And we have to
Hmm.
let our clients know that.
Even if it's
But will
painful
they
to hear,
also,
they gotta hear, right?
what's that?
Even if it's painful to hear, it has to be said. You don't want to keep walking down a dark alley and leading them to some place is going to be an unhappy ending. So,
Correct. And
yeah.
the unfortunate part is because we went through an unpleasant experience together with that client, they may feel embarrassed to ever work with you again, even though you did nothing wrong.
No, that's
So
a
you
great.
also have to be able to salvage the client and make sure that they stick with you and that you weren't responsible for the blame. Because if you referred the lender and the lender did a poor job in explaining what's going to happen, you're tied to that lender. So the
Mm.
experience has your name on it, right? So you have to be super mindful of even retracing, even if you feel like you weren't involved, were you actually involved and whose fault was it?
Right.
And if you weren't at fault, regardless, the experience was still tainted. So how do you keep them on your team to work with you when you fix all of this? And are they comfortable sticking with you? So
Yep.
remember that because an experience has a memory and you're triggered in that memory. You're in that memory.
Good
So you got to
points.
fix that,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Yeah.
And then contracts, like when you're bidding on a house, we've been about four and a half months now in a transitional market where the market's changed and things have slowed down. Pricing has dropped for us here, at least in San Diego. And, so there's a bit more on the market and there's a bit better of a reality for sellers accepting a buyer's offer. But some properties are still getting into multiple offer situations. And how are you creating the mindset for your clients? How do you set things up? Because when you're submitting and it's just you and the seller, okay, and there's still an experience that the client is going through, but it's a totally different experience than if they're in a multiple offer situation, because now you're competing differently, right? It's not just us and them. It's all of us trying to get the seller. And what does that mean? And do your clients have realistic expectations of what they're willing to bid? So you really have to be able to navigate the emotional processing that your clients are going through when it comes to, well, we didn't want to bid, if I just use easy examples of 500,000. We didn't want to bid 510 or 515 or put an escalation clause in there, meaning, we'll pay up to a set amount. And when you have to actually retrain somebody's initial expectation for what they felt the house was worth to them, wipe that clean and rebuild that expectation based on digging into, well, what does this house mean to you? What do you really want out of this house? How long will you be in this house? What are all the triggers and the ties to wanting that house in the first place? And now you have to rebuild that, right? So multiple offer situations can be extremely stressful. And sometimes our clients self-sabotage themselves. And they'll just say, well, it's a risk I'm willing to take. I'll just put in my bid and I won't respond for, we'll just take our time because I think they're desperate. And then another offer comes in, right? And they desperately wanted the house. And now they feel responsible, but they're not going to blame themselves. Oh, I was so dumb. Or they don't say that about themselves. They just get upset. And where do they focus their emotions? Towards you. And then you have to reset that again. It's like our clients never really want to be wrong, even if they know they're wrong. But we have to be able to use language to get back in and just say, look, I totally understand that from a value standpoint, you didn't see 500 as where you wanted to make your initial bid. I get it. And we were trying to see where we could negotiate. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The real question now is, do you still want the home? Yeah, I do. So you have to discover, right? You have to go through this. Okay, so where is the threshold for you? What are you comfortable going in at now, knowing that we have other people that also want the property, right? They feel the same way. And they're willing to put bids in, knowing that there are other people competing for the house. Well, I'm willing to go here. Okay, so let's do this. Instead of going back and forth, let's go in with a really, really strong price point, your max or just about at your max. And we're going to go in, write our strongest offer, and we're going to see what comes of it. Are you comfortable going that route at this point? And you have to recalibrate internally from the way they were hours or moments before or days before to where they have to be now. And you have to be their guidance, right? And then sometimes people will be so energized and so connected to the property and so enthusiastic about it, and they're peaking with excitement that sometimes they'll do irrational things. And have you ever heard the term buyer's remorse before, Gary?
Absolutely.
Right? So now sometimes people get under contract and then they wake up, whether it's a minute after we tell them the good news or the morning, the morning after, and they're freaking out. They can't believe that they actually got it, because sometimes people don't even believe that they're going to get the house. They're just going through the motions that we're leading them through. And then when reality sets in, they panic.
Okay.
They panic, right? So how do we talk them through the experience? And what I work on, I try to let them know that, look, this house is your future. How long do you expect to be here? Well, this is probably my forever home. I'm like, okay. Does this feel like it could be your forever home? I know we got caught up in the process, but really, like, if you think about it, can you see yourself living here until you have to be, moved into a different place, carried out in a box? You can make jokes about it, but you need to understand their vision. Because if their vision is something that they're not connecting to because they're panicking, then that's our job, right? Managing that meltdown by getting them to visualize why they were doing this in the first place is the first step towards recalibrating. And when you can get them to see the house, when you get to build experiences about what the house means, like why did they want that area in the first place? Was it the schools, right? Was it that it was going to be closer to their work? Was it because it was closer to a parent? Whatever the reason, for some people it could be close to an airport because they travel so much. Like, what's the reason? And when you can take the emotional panic away and you can get them to re-visualize what their intent was in the beginning, now they're going to start to calm themselves because they had a purpose before they got into this emotional frenzy that they're now attaching themselves to, which is detaching them from all the right reasons at the moment. Because buying a house is a responsibility. Even though, if you're not living at home, if you're renting a place, you're paying rent. You're responsible. If you own a house that's a bit smaller, okay, maybe you're playing it safe, but your family's growing, you need more room. You're not really having the best time with the mental gymnastics you have to go through with a higher mortgage payment, but you've got a better job. Maybe your spouse is working, but they live safe, they play safe, right? So now we can talk about the additional tax deductions. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going back to, the beginning of the slides where you were talking about the most stressful life moments, and they included buying a home, but then also, starting a new job or getting married. I mean, all three of those, it's cold feet. And then it's just about remembering, why did you make this decision in the first place? What's going to be different 5, 10, 20 years down the road? And then just getting back into that mindset of, here's why I did it, and here's why I think it's going to be a positive outcome, and I just have to take that next step, keeping them on track. I love it. Yeah.
Exactly. And one of my current clients right now, I sold them a great starter home about 3 years ago. And they reached out to me the other day. They want to buy a house because the wife is having baby fever. And the husband and wife are hyper analytical. On a disc profile, they're both super high C's. She's a physician and he's in IT and a high level in IT. So the way they process everything, they can literally build out their future schedule, right? And they want to remain coastal because they bought a coastal home initially. And in order to be able to potentially keep their current property and buy another coastal home, they have to move to a different zip code. This zip code, west of our 5 freeway to keep it coastal, doesn't have the best school system. So even though they don't have a baby, they're already thinking 5 or 6 years out. And so I had to paint a picture to get the worry out of their head of, well, where will both of you be professionally in 5 or 6 years from now? Where will the schools be? There are charter schools. There are all these different options, but they were just focusing on the school rating, and that was it. And I had to build a bigger picture for them so that they can move away from their initial findings and go, well, are you really certain about that? And take the initial reluctance of that zip code and reframe it in a way where they're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's true. It is so far away, isn't it? And take their immediate reality, which is 5 years out, and make it 5 or 6 or 7 years out. She's not even pregnant, right? So taking that emotional component that we can actually trigger within ourselves, the same way a nightmare is not real, but it does trigger real feeling inside of us. That's what happens in all of these processes when we're going through the home buying or selling process, because we live what we're experiencing in our heads. That's what happens. Panic sets in because of a visualization without it ever having occurred. That's what we do. And how do we take them out of that? So you have to also understand what your client's going through so that you can align yourself with them and you can give them the dose of reality. Right? Request for repairs. This dose of reality, unfortunately, is very true when you get your home inspection back. And as I mentioned, I try to preface to my clients, there's going to be 30 to 60 things that get called out in this home inspection. Reality is there's going to be 1 to 3 that are standouts. All those other little ones, we can also just ask for a request for repair to get a handy person over to fix certain things. But the crack in this, or the discovery of that, or our home inspector found a leak behind the wall that the client didn't even know about. And I had that in one of my escrows last year, where there was a washer and dryer upstairs in a 2-story home, and the water lines were actually leaking behind the wall. And our home inspector found it, and there was fungal growth, and there was everything. And of course, my clients panicked because now there's mold involved, right? Like, holy crap. Now what? Oh my gosh, am I going to die if I move in here? Am I literally going to become a giant spore myself, right? And what does it mean? And the sellers initially they just were like, hey, we'll give you a credit. And we're like, no, you need to remediate and remedy with a licensed contractor so we know there's clearance. Forget it. And you also have to be able to know how to posture for your clients. Because without that, right, without getting remediation, instead of just, here's a credit, and what would we have discovered if we took the credit when we opened up the walls and found out maybe there was way more going on than we ever experienced or understood or expected, right? Mm-hmm. So when these requests for repairs come back, you have to be able to demonstrate to your clients that you're going to stand fast on the most important things that need to be remedied. Everything else is minor, caulking, right, or grout in the tile work. Like, some people will freak out. I had one client say that there weren't the rubber, the rings that you put into a spigot for the hose bibs outside a house. I'm like, you're going to ask the seller for a 10-cent part? Yep. I'm like, what? So you have to know that you're going to be in this minefield and how to work and navigate all these things that come up. And you also have to ask your client the level of where they're gauging that repair, right? I might think something is extremely small, but for them, they might see it as an 8 or 9 on a level of 10. Like, you can never expect to understand what the client is experiencing or expecting. Right. But once you compile all of their expectations, then you can look at them. And when you look at them together, you can mitigate most of them by saying, look, we'll ask for this is going to cost nothing. We'll get a repair, credit, and I have a handy person that can take care of that. These are the ones we really have to work on. And are we on the same page? You have to be on the same page with your client. And again, you can never expect to know on their behalf, because if you do that, now you're creating liability for yourself. Mm-hmm. So when you're setting these expectations, or when a seller says, oh yeah, I'll just fix that to your buyer, like, even in your language, you have to put that it's going to be fixed by a licensed contractor. Because if they fix it and it wasn't done professionally and it failed, whose fault is that, right? So you really have to show them that you're fighting on their behalf, or you're negotiating for them. I don't want to say fighting, but sometimes it turns into a fight. And even with the other agent, sometimes you have to manage the other agent's meltdown. Well, my seller's telling me that they're not going to do this. And it's just like, oh my God, you're useless. How do I help you work with the seller now? And I find myself quarterbacking a lot of transactions, helping even the other agent, right? Mm-hmm. So any comments on this slide, Gary, while we're
I was going to say, I had this exact thing happen to me. The last house I just bought, the one that I'm in now, had some issues with some roots from a big tree that were too close to the house. And they offered us a discount on the purchase price as opposed to fixing it. And I took that deal. And it was never a priority to me until 2 years later, when it had to become a priority to me, and it cost me a lot more than they saved me. So it's something that I feel like if I could have had the right agent tell me, what could happen if this goes wrong, and how bad it could have been, I would have said, you know what, let's stick to the price and you fix this before we sign everything off. So, but I feel like they weren't on my side there. So I 100% get this one. Yeah.
And what I was going to say is, look at the language that you used. I had a bad agent.
Yeah.
That's what you just said.
You're right. I wouldn't.
So,
yeah.
But, and you see what I mean? Like, that experience triggers the advice or lack thereof
Did I
that you
seem
received
angry,
from
Steven?
your agent.
Did I seem angry?
Right? Well, right. But again, it's our fault. I don't care who we want to blame it on. It doesn't matter. Again, and I was a waiter way back when, when I was 18 years old. And the experience, it didn't matter what the kitchen did. I was responsible for everything, right? It didn't matter if the bartender was late making a drink. It was still my fault. The
Yep.
experience always comes back to the front-facing person.
Yep.
And Gary, you'll never use that agent again.
Correct.
And if they would have given you better advice in the fact of, hey, we can ask them to do this, but those roots aren't going to stop growing, Gary. So I would
Yeah.
have them take care of it right now. If you choose to take the credit and that's the route you want to go, okay, right? And see, if they would have framed it that way for you, then you can't blame them anymore. But they
Right.
never gave you an option, right?
Not really. Yeah.
So if you look at that, again, how we're framing everything for our clients is what's going to mitigate the issues or at least take most of the responsibility away from us. And I say most because even if we said, I told you so in the service business, you can't go to your client and say, I told you so. It doesn't matter because maybe you could have used stronger language. It's always our fault.
Yeah.
So in these repairs, when they're coming, we have to be able to posture on behalf of our clients, go to the listing agent, again, if we're representing the buyer, and say to them, hey, I need you to understand if these things are not accepted by your seller, we are going to walk away from the transaction. I just need you to understand that. This isn't for you to come back and tell me that your seller doesn't want to. I need you to carry the weight of what I'm expressing to you over to the seller. And this is not a renegotiation on these three things. This is a yes or no. If it's a no, please just send over a cancellation. And see what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying to people. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'll even have my clients on the phone with me. I'll make the call with them, listening to what I'm saying so they know I have their back. I'm weird like that. I'll do those things. Just right? Just so my client knows that I'm saying and expressing exactly what I need to on their behalf.
Mm-hmm. It's
So the
amazing.
other landmine is an appraisal. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, you said at the beginning that the majority of your clients come by source of referral now, and it's no doubt because everything that you're talking about, like so many people spend so much money on new client acquisition, and that's
Yes,
important. You definitely have to
it is.
keep that pipe fed. But
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing about building up value, showing them what you're doing that makes you different, letting them know you're definitely on their side, standing in battle when need be, being clear and honest and sometimes harsh when necessary. And that's what keeps them coming back. I'm not going to the guy I used last time, but if I'd gotten the service and the recommendations and such that you're providing, you'd be the first
Yep.
one I call in. And refer my friends to. I'd feel like you'd treat my sister or my parents, with the same respect. So
Absolutely. And that's important, right? We're
yeah.
creating an image, we're creating a brand. And the only way to universally have that brand is to demonstrate that we take care of people and that we're on their side, right?
Mm,
And when I say we're going to war together, I'll tell it to my clients at times, like, we're going to war together. And like, huh? I go, well, when you join the military, you're joining it for your country. When you're in battle, you're fighting for the person beside you. And that's
mhm.
what I'm doing. I'm basically representing and taking care of you. That's my process until we're out of this situation. And appraisals, right? Like when we're going into this, sometimes when the market was moving up so fast, who knew where value was? Sometimes you just have to throw out a ridiculous number and pray to God that it would come back at value, right? And what happens when it doesn't? What happens when it doesn't? And that appraisal sometimes will come back way low. And what do we do? And did we talk about that initially with the listing agent to mitigate or at least plant the seed, right? Hey, if we're coming in here, we really love the house, we're willing to forego $5,000 over and above appraised value because we like it that much. But if the discrepancy is more than 10,000, over, let's just say, is your seller prepared to revisit the value of the house? Well, let's cross that bridge when we get there. I'm like, okay, but I'm prefacing this right now so that they know we want it. Everybody's doing crazy stuff, but from what you've told me, nobody has removed their contingency for appraisal value, right? It still has to come in. So you have to know how to navigate those situations, because if you haven't even talked about the appraisal coming in too low with your buyer, now what, right? Now all of a sudden it's like, hey Brian, well that sucks, forget it, right? Where
Yeah.
some people, and I have this happen all the time, my clients will pay over and above appraised value because I've understood what they're willing to do instead of just dropping it on them and then hoping that we can fix it. Try to have that go around in the beginning. And I had this happen on a property I was selling last year where the appraiser was a doorknob, and they really came in under market. And I was like, crap. And my client's military, and he was being relocated. And he's like, hey, Steve, we don't have time to do this. I said, give me a week. We have time. Give me a week. I went back to the buyer. I said, we're not selling it at this price. Your option is you can either walk away or you can deal with one of my lenders. They chose to work with one of my lenders. And then I made sure that I did all the homework for the appraisal, sent it to the appraiser as well, so that they at least had my findings, and then the appraisal came back in at value. And my client was so thankful, even though they were ready to walk away from the money that they were respectfully due because they were in a panic situation.
Yeah.
But they were willing to let it go. I didn't let it. They didn't melt down over it, but they were willing to relent. They were willing to just lay down. I said, no way. And this is a client that has bought and sold 4 properties with me, and they've become great friends. I was like, absolutely not. They moved out of state now, but I was like, no way, Jason, absolutely not. And I took care of them, right? But I had to manage the buyer's meltdown because they had a meltdown. And she was actually a licensed real estate agent representing herself. And she listened to me through the process because they were so in love with the property, but I wasn't going to allow it to be sold at the discrepancy between a bad appraisal and what market value was.
That's
So
got
I
to
had
be
to manage the other side. What's that?
That's got to be a fun treat when they're representing themselves and they're a realtor. It's
right. And she was great. But she really was. And she was willing, but she had to listen, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, envision yourself this way, whether you're flexible enough to do yoga, right? But you can look at this slide and just understand that you have to be the calm. You're the one that has to be able to pull your emotions out of the event. You have to be the sounding board. You have to be the one that people can just vent to and you hear their actual story or their point. Instead of just go, yeah, we're just going to do this and this and this, because that's not what everybody wants all the time, right? Sometimes people just need to vent and vocalize. And if you're hearing your client properly, if you're front loading the experience by telling them and showing them what the experience is going to be like with a flow chart, if you're going to let them know that there are 4 common places within the escrow period that they're going to experience turmoil, and let them know that up front, then it's not a surprise, right? If you work with great lenders and you know that when you put them in touch with one, even if they say they've got one and they've got it covered, I always would just say, look, you're in a 6-figure experience, if not a 7-figure experience. Will a 10 or 15-minute conversation with a professional I trust and feel comfortable with be worth your time, do you think? For hundreds of thousands of dollars, will a small moment in your day, do you think it'll be worth it for you to have this conversation just to make sure you're taken care of? Okay, right? And that's what you want. You want to make sure that they're taken care of. Because again, I blame myself for things that go wrong because I didn't voice what needs to be said during this experience. And this experience is something that I've experienced thousands of times, which most buyers and sellers haven't. You bought and sold how many properties, Gary?
I mean, just personally, 4.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
4, yeah.
And 4 is actually quite a lot.
Yeah.
And would you call yourself an expert in the home buying or selling?
No, I would not.
Right. So this is our job, right?
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions, and I really want to open this up to all of you, and I'm super grateful for all of you spending and sharing time with us to go through this because I want to talk about the reality of our industry and not just, hey, buy more leads or, hey, do this. I mean, even having manage the meltdown in lead conversion for people is something that I should have from an agent standpoint, right? But these are the things that we go through. And if I can help any one of you with your how do I or what I've experienced, like I'm speaking on your behalf, I'd love to be able to share some of my experience with you. So with that being said, if you want to open it up to some questions, Gary, I'd love to see how I can help our listeners.
Yeah, anybody out there that wants to, you can hit on that chat button and send in a question. I have one here already, and it's
Yep.
a big part of this you say is setting up the setting up the expectations beforehand. And I'm going to go back to that sheet where you talk about everything that's involved. You know, the one that kind of blew my mind with like 5 different boxes. Yeah. Do you have a system in place to let people know where they're at in the process, or is it picking up a phone and saying, here's where we're at now and here's what's happening next? I mean, how do you disseminate the information of where we're at?
So absolutely. So from the buyer side, right? Like if you're working with a great lender, and I have to preface the word great, they are going to let the client know where we are in the lending experience. Mm-hmm. So from the lending side, I'm not trying to just be redundant with things. Hey, I'll send you this too, and the lender will. You really want your professionals that work with you to have a clear understanding of what your expectations are of them during the client experience. So on the lending side, the lender is the one who updates them. Hey, the appraisal was ordered. Hey, appraisal's back in at value. We're clear for docs, all of those things. So your professionals also have to be able to go through the experience with you and also be able to live up to the professional standards that you've created. And part of that is them being transparent, because I can't make calls all the time to my lenders, but in order for lenders to work with me, they have to know that this is my expectation of them. So that's on the lending side. Are there additional questions to that? Whomever sent over that question, are there other specifics that you're wondering about?
There wasn't, but I could imagine, like, what about on the appraisal piece? The stuff that isn't lender related. How do they know?
That will be the lender again, because the lender is the one who's going to be notified that the appraisal comes back to the AMC and that it's under review. And then it's going to be, when it's sent to the bank will internally review the appraisal before they even let the lender know themselves. So even the bank, when they get the appraisal back, they don't even let the lender know up front. They're doing an appraisal review before they turn over the appraisal. But
and this is why I rely on experts like you, and I don't represent myself. I'm not a FSBO guy. I don't do that. I wouldn't try.
Right. But the lending side, which is really the critical piece, the other parts are have a great transaction coordinator, because the transaction coordinator will also send out all the paperwork in a timely fashion to you, and then they'll follow up with the client. Hey, we don't have this back yet. And we have timelines, right? We have a review period. Like within days, the seller is going to have their seller disclosures over to the buyer, right? And then the buyer is also going to have X amount of time to review those. So we do have timelines that are set in my calendar for when those dates hit. So with respect to that, yes, those are my responsibility to make sure those timelines are met. And Google Calendar is your friend, because you have to know when those timelines are getting close. And do you need more time, or are you fine? Because sometimes you're going to be going through these discoveries and you need more time because you have to rediscover, dig in deeper. Maybe there's problems that came out, and then you need an extension of time on your current contingency times.
Well, we have about 5 minutes, and I fear asking this question because I feel like we could do an hour on it.
Sure.
But I've heard some experts out there in the real estate world say that you have to know when you're being abused by your client. and you need to be able to understand that and fire them if necessary. How do you balance being able to do something like that with your whole methodology of we're going this as a team and making sure that if somebody else screws them, that you're battling for them and trying to bring them down when they're on the cliff? You know what I mean? Like, how do you balance that?
Right.
And then so that you're not making a hasty decision and saying, you know what, you're just being unreasonable and goodbye. I don't know. How do you address something like that?
So that was a very broad question. If you just had to narrow it down for me and to talk about some specifics, how can you reframe that for me?
Okay, so you put in a bid and somebody else beats you out, and then the client blames you for not doing your job. You explain why you made the decision you did or why things went the way they did and how you can change things for the future, and they're still upset. They're not, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So a big part, again, is mitigating in the beginning, right? So front loading. So if we're in a multiple offer situation, I tell every single one of my clients that I want to write what's called an escalation clause into my contract. They're like, oh, what's that? I'm like, well, if anybody beats us, we're going to escalate our offer to X dollar value, whether it's $1,500 or $2,000 over and above the highest net amount. And they're like, net amount? I'm like, well, you know, if a realtor is kicking in some commissions or things like that, sometimes the number is not just the number. If the number is lower, but the realtor was kicking in $5,000, because some agents will do that, I need to know the net number. So are you prepared to put an escalation clause in as far as your offer? And they'll be like, well, what are the risks? And I'll go, look, the reason I like to do this is because I'd rather have the opportunity to say no to the price that came back than never have the opportunity at all. And I just try to let my clients know, even though it might be unfair to the listing side. And again, you know, this is just playing the game. I don't know what my client's ultimately going to do, but I'm working on their behalf. Yeah. If the listing side calls us back and tells us that, hey, the offer, the winning offer, if you accept with this escalation clause, is 517. And maybe my client was only willing to go up to 512, right? Mm-hmm. And then I have a discussion with my client of, well, what's 512 versus 517 in a mortgage payment? It's very little. Are you willing to actually buy this house at X now that they said yes to us, versus we never had that opportunity because we just followed this process?
Right.
And because I've had that upfront conversation, it's very difficult for my client to come back to me and say, you did this wrong, because I put them in a position to win, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, and then back to the way you were originally framing it, if we have a very strong-willed or pushy client, right, you don't always want to work with people that are going to tell you what to do or how to do your job, because I know what to do and I know how to do my job. And if I were a cook and I had somebody telling me exactly how to cook everything, and did I blanch this, and did I cook it for that long, and did I put that spice in it, I'm like, yeah, you should probably cook your own meal next time. I'm done with you. Because you can also start to find out what is your client really like. Yeah. And if you feel like your client is going to be a nightmare through the experience because they've already demonstrated they're a living nightmare at the beginning of the experience, are you commission hungry? And you have to have that discussion with yourself, where you're going to sacrifice yourself through the process, or will you set them straight? And you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to have a diplomatic conversation with your client that doesn't have them posture, but you tell them how it is. I'm going to take care of you, and I want to understand what's really important to you. Now I'm going to go to work for you. And please understand, I know my craft. So I want to understand what your expectations are so that I can meet and exceed your level of expectation. Because if you don't set those ground rules in the beginning, then the meltdown will happen constantly. And you're going to be involved in the meltdown instead of just trying to protect them from things that happen during the process that were unforeseen. They're causing stress everywhere. So you have to be able to demonstrate and lay out what the expectations are.
It's really about the preparation and the expectations, yes, and taking care of them, you know, and no surprises. No surprises.
Exactly.
You know,
and we're still carrying strong with our attendees right now, just from what I'm seeing our count out. So, I mean, if there are any additional questions,
Any other
again, I'm
questions?
just here to serve you guys. What's that?
Yeah. I don't see any other questions coming through. Yeah, I mean, we are on that hour. I mean, do you have anything you wanted to close with? I mean, I definitely, from the Chime side, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This is definitely a unique conversation that I think everybody needs to have. And, you're usually focused on thing 1, 2, or 3 when this is really the groundwork that needs to be laid for everything. And I
Absolutely.
just.
And we don't learn this, right? We don't learn this. You learn. It's trial by fire to learn this stuff. And I'm tired of getting burnt, in this industry. But the unfortunate part is there are so few people that have enough experience to talk about how well-rounded this industry really is. Instead, we focus on, okay, are you making your calls today? Or what are you doing for your leads? Or where are you working at open house? And that's great. I mean, those are all important. You have to lead generate and do all of the things that are critical to being a business. But then when you're actually managing a transaction, do you know what to expect? And do you know how to keep it so that it moves through? And at the end, your clients still have a smile on their face. Can you make that happen?
That's right.
Right. So for our attendees, if you ever want to reach out to me, there's my email below. I really am an open book, and I'm a big advocate for this industry, and I teach at the real estate boards here in San Diego only because so many people don't know what to expect in this industry because so much happens in a transaction that nobody really talks about. So Steven at sdsoldbysteve.com, which is below. And yeah, it's, I really appreciate all of you being on and listening to what I'm bringing forth for you, because I believe it's really important that everybody has a clear picture of what real estate sales really entails.
Yeah, and guys, don't be afraid to reach out to him and go to that website, coachingwithsteve.com. He comes from a place of altruism. He's doing this to pay it forward. He's seen those things. He's done those things. He hasn't just read about those things. And if you need help, this is a guy who can help you. Thank you so much, Steven, for coming out today. Call us if you need anything. And guys, reach out to Steven. Check out his website. If you need anything here on the Chime side with your CRM, your lead generation, your website, of course, I'm Gary. I'll be there to help you. You can get me at gary.parker@chimeinc.com. But other than that, I hope 2019 is a better year than you even planned for. I hope you kick some butt. And I think you can do that if you set up proper expectations like Steven's been talking about. But thank you so much. And Steven, again, thank you, my friend.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thanks, guys. Bye, guys.